Anyway, I will speak about the platformization of politics and society and the role of communication in this game. And my idea is to subdivide my speech in 4 parts. The first one will focus on the role of neoliberalism and depoliticization in this process. Then I will try to give you some aspects and some ideas, my ideas, of course, about the so-called platform society. And I will conclude with 2 other points that are obviously really interconnected, such as the post-publish, the new concept, the invasive and in a certain way also innovative concept of post-public sphere, and the role of digital capitalism in the transformation of the public sphere and the communication as a whole. So let's start immediately with some basic concepts and some theoretical point concerning the neoliberalism and the depoliticization. As you know, and this is very well known, I think, there is a difference between the classic liberalism and the so-called neoliberal turn or neoliberal approach, or according to many scholars, neoliberal ideology. As you know, the basis, the background, the classic liberalism is rooted in John Locke's idea of the individual freedom and the role of the state as a regulator in the possibility to have a free market in a balanced relationship between different social actors. Making a great time jump, we have the Keynes approach to economy that is very important for my discourse today, because according to John Maynard Keynes, the centrality of the market is very peculiar, but at the same time, Keynes is against the free market. So at the same time, centrality of the market, but to the free market, because the presence of the state is, according to Keynes, absolutely necessary, in particular in the strategic national companies such as railways or energy companies. And this has been one of the action line of in the organization of the welfare after the Second World War across Europe and many other countries of Western world. So of course there are some differences between the so-called Western world and the south of the world. So anyway, according to the neoliberal thinkers, as you know, the regulatory presence of governments and the growth of public spending and their tariff barriers to the international trade have been responsible for creating the conditions for the crisis of the 1970s. That is one of the recurring crises in the West world. So I want to underline that the 2008 crisis is not the only of the capitalist world, and that is only one of the recurring crises of this specific economic system. So anyway, the crisis of the 1970s was considered as the output, according to many scholars, of the strong presence of the states and the governments in the regulatory process. This is, we have the emergence, we have seen the emergence and the insurgence of a new idea of organization of society and economic life that is called neoliberalism. Defining neoliberalism is absolutely complicated because the neoliberalism is not a unified doctrine, as you can easily imagine. And at the same time, the origins of the neoliberal movement can be traced not only in the 70s, but also in the contribution of Hayek, for example, and Ludwig von Mises to the so-called socialist calculation debate of the 1920s, 1930s. And at the same time, the idea to reinvent liberalism promoted by the economic schools in New York, Chicago, Freiburg, and Vienna up until the 1970s are the starting point to understand the emergence and the insurgence of the so-called neoliberalism. Anyway, at the end of the 70s and for 20 years, we have three dimensions that have been affirmed in this scenario. The first one is a sort of ideology propagated by the global power elite, and probably they are the first responsible for the creation of a new neoliberal hegemony. The second dimension is the idea of the importance of governance and governmentality. In particular, the concept of governmentalities is rooted in an entrepreneurial values such as competitiveness, self-interest, decentralization, and the centrality of individual empowerment and devolution of central state power are considered the two basic elements to create a new world that should be in the neoliberal thinkers' statement business-friendly and adapted to a new competitive world based on a sort of quantitative and measurable new world organization. And third dimension, that of the public policies. We have seen a great propaganda on the importance of new public policies, and in particular on three sub-points that are on the background of these policies: the deregulation, of course, of the economy, the liberalization of trade and industry, and the privatization of state-owned enterprise. And 3 points have been the basic background for the creation of new public policies that have been the ideological asset of the new neoliberal conceptions. On the other hand, these new public policies have established a new idea of the state organization and the public administration organizations that is usually called new public management, that has been used also in some progressive position, and that have been used to affirm the diminishing importance of the state. In the relationship between neoliberalism and new public management have been studied by many scholars, and probably I think we have to study further this point, because new public management has been used also by some left-wing governments as a sort of new form of regulation, but it obeys to a logic that is based on measurement, quantitative asset, and the loss of any importance of qualitative organization of society. And even the idea of a market-oriented government is a fruit, is an output of new public management. As you know, we have had many other important points to consider. I don't want to bore you with this point, but I only want to underline the importance of some specific events, such as, for example, the Bretton Woods Conference and the invention of the concept of multilateralism, and also the born of WTO, the creation of WTO in 1995, and the born of a sort of hyper-globalization that has accompanied the new trend the ordoliberalism or neoliberalism. And of course, some other points that are very known, such as the Washington Consensus. The state is the principal obstacle to economic growth. This is their basic assumption. And the triadic position that is probably the background of the neoliberal ideology during the last 20 years: stabilize, liberalize, privatize, that are the three main points of the new trend towards a new neoliberal world. And in this scenario, we can observe some reforms, some political reforms, such as the reform of public administration, the idea of flexibility of labor market, and the independence, the economic and political independence of the central bank. All these reforms are rooted in the evolution of the so-called neoliberalism, such as many other points. We have here 10 points, a sort of decalogue of the Washington Consensus: the growth of a new fiscal discipline, the deregulation of the economy, the trade liberalization, the competitive exchange rates, and so on. So 10 different points that put in evidence the transformation in the neoliberal world. There are also other keywords to consider for our media scholars, such as, for example, new words coming from the economic area, but that are very important also for communication, and in particular for political communication. Think about some new words of the 80s and 90s, such as the Reaganomics and Thatcherism, neoconservatism, and globalism, that are anyway very important to illustrate and to define this scenario, the frame in which the neoliberal turn as at famous points. And in particular, one of these new words, globalism, that is a bit different than globalization, because the globalism is the ideology of the primacy of economics over politics, is the background. The globalism is the background of the so-called process of depoliticization. But at this point, rapidly, what is depoliticization? Here, a very basic definition: define depoliticization as reducing politics to the policy dimension with a substantial marginalization, both ideological conflict and of the polity as a project community. This definition is based upon the triadic elements that compose the politics in all the handbooks of political science. Politics as politics as a strategic activity to create a new world, an old world, but to a world. The politics as policy, that is the management of the strategic asset of politics, and the politics as polity, it means as a community, as a project community, that is also the background for the public opinion and the place in which some theoretical exchange are possible. So this definition is based upon this triadic assumption of the politics, and the of politics of the politics to the policy dimension is a problem in terms of ideological and strategical idea of the politics. So at this point, we can see the emergence of another very difficult concept, difficult to define, that is the anti-politics, that overlaps in many cases, in many regards, with depoliticization, but at the same time, it is also a slippery concept, because it's a bit liquid, and in many cases, it's difficult to define and also to quantify what anti-politics means. And in any case, the relationship between anti-politics and depoliticization is very clear, and this slippery concept of anti-politics can be connected with, in many cases, with the insurgent populist politicians, according to Albertazzi and Müller, for example, whose dominant slogans concern their capacity to replace the exhausted politics with more authentic governing skills, and are, in many cases, these governing skills, minimal action of governance. Here we have another important point, in my opinion, that is the relationship between post-politics and depoliticization and the creation of a new economic centrality, economic dimension centrality. This shifting is made possible by this new scenario in which the centrality of the political dimension is replaced by the centrality of the economic dimension, with the creation, for example, of business-friendly environment that is one of the storytelling of the rhetoric that is very present in the politicians and also in many media scholars, books and articles and so on, such as the new rhetoric on the external imposition of measure of austerity, for example, or again, the transforming business priorities into public policies. This is another way to replace the centrality of the state with the centrality of the private enterprises, in which the business priorities become the centrality of public policies, become the essence of the public policies. This shifting is typical of the process of depoliticization, such as the shifting from government to governance. This is another important storytelling or rhetoric, sorry, in the political discourse in the last 25 years. And the post-politics is a sort of accelerator of this process of shifting from government to governance. This is evident also in some area of the so-called democratic innovations, in which we citizens are called to discuss, for example, the role of a new communitarian action, and we are to decide, for example, some particular aspects, such as how to color the fence of our public gardens, or how to organize the collection of waste, and so many other important things, but we have no voice over economic treaties or over the expenditure for weapons or many other aspects of social and political life. And the delegitimization of intermediate bodies together with this shifting from government to governance is responsible for a diminution of the power of the citizens, even if it seems that we have more power because we can decide the color of the fence of our public gardens. So that is important, but at the same time, it's not the only thing that we can consider as politics. So our role is to decide something about governance, but nothing about government. This is in many cases an ideology that has been established and promoted by the media, by the new public sphere created by the media. And the facilitators in this trend are, of course, the neoliberal approaches. First of all, the globalization, that is a general frame in which we live, the different kinds of globalization, and the cultural perspective of new public management, as I have had the occasion to cite before, the storytelling on the effect of governance, usually interpreted as a simple collection of public policies. That is the new trend towards a new world that is based upon new keywords. Think about the newism, the privatization, the concept of the reconfiguration of the concept of identity, the short-termism, the efficiency, and the importance of the concept of meritocracy that have accompanied all the rhetoric of the neoliberalism. Meritocracy as a social narrative used usually to justify economic and social inequalities and the role it plays in it. It is a figure that represents a meritocracy. That is not the idea to create a more egalitarian world, but on the opposite is the justification for the not equal world. So in this scenario, we have the insurgence of the so-called platform society, in which platforms, of course, are not the platforms you are seeing now. This is an oil platform that have another role, but in the communication system, the platforms play a very important node role, exactly like a platform in the sea, like a oil platform in the sea. So when we speak about platform, we usually refer to a concept that have several meanings. I usually try to simplify this meaning, recurring to 4 different ideas of platforms. But it is possible, of course, to subdivide these meanings in other possible organization of our thought. So first of all, the platform can be interpreted as a highly complex websites that offer a plurality of services, from the inter-individual group relationship to commercial services. So in this case, we have the idea of platform such as, for example, Facebook, Google, or many other internet services, but also the websites offering food delivery services, and in general, all those that can be placed in the area of the so-called digital capitalism. This is the first meaning of platform. We have another meaning of platform that is referring to the global portals for the e-commerce. Think about the very famous Amazon, Alibaba, and so on, that is related to the international market, but also the e-commerce on the local basis. So the e-commerce portals of a specific particular goods, and the idea of platform as global portals for e-commerce has been the most used meaning in the European documents in the decade 2010-2019. It is very meaningful, in my opinion, that this specific idea of platform has been the most used meaning in the official documents of the European Union. So it means that there is a different weight of the different meanings. We have, in my opinion, other two meanings. The third is the online websites managed by public administrations and citizens' involvement. This is typical, for example, in all the aspects of some form of interlocution in digital democracy, in e-democracy and e-government, in this strange overlapping of e-democracy and e-government. And its importance in the concept of open government that has been established, as you know, a famous document in 2009 of Barack Obama's administration, but it is present also in other previous documents established in some European Commission. So the fourth meaning of platform is that of specialized online website for discussion, organization of decisions of making process, and the activation of democratic practices. And here we have two subdivisions, because we have platforms for democratic participation, such as those created for the online citizenship from one side, and from the other side, we have private but politically important platform for political activity. I here refer to political party platform, and they are responsible. They are the acceleration for the insurgence of the new forms of political parties, such as, for example, the so-called platform party or digital parties. So 4 different meanings when we speak about platform. And at the same time, platforms are important because they do not reflect the social, they produce the social structures in which we live. So in other words, the platforms are not only structures, technical structures, but are societal organization, and they are very important to recreate, define our world and our societal organization. This sentence is taken from a very influential book, Platform Society, written by Jose van Dijk, Thomas Poel, and Martin de Waal, 3 Dutch scholars, and this book is very influential, very famous. So I don't need to remind you further. And the platforms are very important also for the emergence and affirmation of the so-called digital capitalism. That is also responsible for what Dalian Jean has called the platform, the new platform imperialism. That is a sort of replacing of the old media imperialism stated by Schiller in 1969. So the situation is changed, the world is deeply changed, but we have replaced the media imperialism with a platform imperialism that is the very essence of the world in which we live now. And of course, the power of the platforms is made evident by the insurgence of the so-called digital capitalism. That is the growing integration of production, consumption, finance, logistics, and marketing that are responsible for the new merging of the media system and the communication systems that is at the same framed in the digital platform systems, and that is probably the very essence of so-called platform society. We have also to remind anyway that there is a background in the digital world that is the material work that is still important, even if in many cases we try to forget this important point. The existence of miners, for example, is essential for the production of processors, and the existence of the assemblers is important for the creation of a world in which the digital workers of communications can produce their activities, realizing the news, for example, or public opinion. So in this world, we have new giants, such as the so-called GAFAM, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, but also the emergence of new giants, great enterprises, such as the Natu, Netflix, Airbnb, Tesla, and Uber, or the BATX, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, Xiaomi. So we have a lot of new platforms and new digital actors that are very important in the creation of a new world. And this is evident taking a look at the data. This is an analysis made by the French group of thinkers, a think tank, a French think tank, this is called La Boussole. And here they present the 10 enterprises which have the most capitalization in the market. And in particular, we have a ranking that is very important as a curiosity to observe, in which the most important thing to observe are the elements of comparison, les éléments de comparaison, as you can see in this slide. The PIB is the internal product of the French Republic, that is more or less such as the only of the Apple. That is very important to consider the capacity of these digital enterprises to create the world and to establish new architecture in this world. Communication in the age of platforms is deeply changed. Communication is a commodity now, is not only a dialogical mode to realize a new world in which people are interconnected, as in some optimistic view of the first period of the digital revolution. So it's impossible now to consider, for example, the participatory cultures as the proof, as the idea that show the creation of a new interconnected world in which all the people are equal. But we are replacing the optimistic perception of 20 years ago with a more realistic, more realistic view on this world, in which communication is a commodity. And in this platform society, the success of the authoritarian forms of information are very evident, at the point that the humanistic idea of information has been totally replaced, more or less, by the authoritarian mode of information, authoritarian idea of information, in which the knowledge and communication are considered only as commodities. In this scenario, we have also the platformization of the public sphere, because the platforms are very important, and at the same time, the digital platforms are not only tools, but as I have said before, they define the structure, the architecture of the new world society, the new global society. So we live in a new public sphere. The concept of public sphere is strongly connected with the concept of post-democracy, established by Colin between 1999 and 2004, and confirmed and strongly affirmed by the same author in 2020 in a book translated also in Italian, I say for the Italian friends, that is Combattere la post-democrazia, but in English is Post-Democracy After the Crisis, published at the beginning of 2020, written before the pandemic, in which Colin Crouch said, I was accused to be too pessimistic in my book of 2003-2004, Post-Democracy, that has been published before in Italian, then in English. But I want to affirm, so Colin, the preface of Post-Democracy After the Crisis, I want to affirm that I was too optimistic in that book, because the situation now is even worse. And think that Colin Crouch affirmed his pessimistic and realistic view of the post-democracy before the pandemic. So I only want to remind you the four basic conceptions of the idea of post-democracy: the relationship between liberalism and democracy, the conflict towards equality and market opportunities, usually resolved in favor of the market opportunities, the business as a model for the institutions, the professionalization of the politics that is very important in political communication, and its transformation in a new, even in a new discipline based on propaganda and manipulation, and always less on the analysis of the political scenario, and the commodification of citizenship. These 4 points are the very essence of post-democracy. And the public sphere, as a special metaphor, is the frame in which we can individuate the relationship between itself, the public sphere, and the post-democracy. And we live in a transition phase. And the protected and regulatory space that was the public sphere of the past, even if it was unstable and transitional, has been replaced by a new transition phase, dramatically created by the COVID-19 pandemic. And this transition phase is the so-called post-public sphere, as Aaron Davis in 2009, Philip Schlesinger in 2020, and myself have tried to define. And this new post-public sphere is the spin-off, in a certain way, of the dilution of the public sphere as stated by Niemann in 2008. So the new post-public sphere is based upon some general things that we can consider in these final slides. Awakening of institutions, that is evident also in considering the role of intermediate bodies, the risk policy development, and the insurgence of the crisis paradigm. So the crisis not only as an accident, the crisis not only as a temporary event, but the crisis as a paradigm in which we continuously live, in which the new societies are organized. The delegitimization of experts and elites that is at the same time responsible for the depoliticization of public discourse and the repoliticization of the technocratic elites. You know, this is a bit controversial because the delegitimization of experts and elites also produce the new relegitimation and the new repoliticization of the new technocracies. The ideological fragmentation of the political parties and their legitimation, the return of nationalisms and of identity politics in the new idea and the new meaning of identity as we had before, the instability of the new parties and movements, the crisis of the traditional business model of the new system that is responsible for the so-called platformization of the news system, the uncontrollable news and information flows in the social media that make evident and possible the insurgence of fake news and information disorder in general, the information overload, the problem of the truth in the information system that has given us the opportunity to reread Hannah Arendt's idea of the inconciliability between truth and politics, the volatility of the electorate that is a trend that is typical in particular of the Western world, but it is transversal in this moment across the world, and it is typical of the transformation of democracies, the insurgence of new polarized and fragmented tendencies, and the growing gap between the world of public politics that is visible and symbolic, and that of private politics that is opaque and based on lobbyists and technicians. It is a statement, an idea. There is a gap between the world of public politics and that of private politics. By J. Blumler, one of the father of communication studies, as you know. He died in January of this year, and this is also an occasion to remember the importance of the work and the figure of J. Blumler, who was a magister for much of us and also friends. And we can also here to see the background of the post-public sphere. So we can summarize the background of the post-public sphere. Post-representative trends as established by John Kane in 2015, the importance of the new social media and the old media as the new to create a new space. The centrality of digital communication ecosystems in the development processes of the so-called occasional representations, and the emergence of the apparent conceptual oxymoron of the so-called direct representations, as stated by Nadia Urbinati in 2020. The development of the post-political, a slippery concept, as we have seen before, that is ambiguous and anyway connected with the process of depoliticization, the post-democracy that makes the mechanisms of commodification of citizenship its distinctive feature, the slipping from the idea of government to the notion of governance, as we have seen before, and of course, the general frame of the neoliberal ideology that underlie the tendencies of the depoliticization. These 6 points are the background of the post-public sphere that are the prosecution and the final step of a transformation of the old pieces, the mass society, in the new public spaces, the network societies, as established by Van Dijk and Eicher in 2018, a new public space, and the platform society and the post-public sphere are the final points of this mechanism of transformation. So this is a table in which I try to put together this puzzle of different conceptions, ideas, and positions. So the transformation from mass society to society and the emergence of a new network and connective society that degrading in the platform society, but at the same time, some concepts such as the post-democracy, the depoliticization, the frame of neoliberalism, the affirmation and insurgence of digital capitalism, that is at the same time a spin-off of information society, but also a tool of the platform society, and so the insurgence of the new post-public sphere, that is at the same time an effect of democracy and a result of a transformation from the mass society to the connected society. And the post-public sphere is important also to understand the emergence of new forms of populisms. And in particular, it's important to understand the overcoming the public sphere as a unitary place of social discourse that is accelerated by the fragmentation in communication sphere that is strongly connected to the development of social media and of digital platforms. These 2 points, and I go to conclusion, unification and fragmentation, are the common path of authoritarian populism and neoliberalism. And at the same time, they are promoted and legitimated by the new communication systems. Forms of concentration and inequalities of power constitute a limitation of the public sphere. And both authoritarian populism and neoliberalism tend to the unification of public sphere, and from one side, the other side, to its fragmentation. The post-public sphere is the result of this strange balance between unification, la pensée unique, the unified thought, and the fragmentation. And it's also provoked, it also creates the legitimacy of the pensée unique, the single thought, that is one of the results of a platformized post-public sphere, and it's one of the results digital ecosystems that is transitional, but at the same time is the real essence of the new architecture of politics and communication. I only want to conclude giving you some further elements for reflection that are my elements, of course. I try to reflect now upon. I'm trying to study how the centrality of platform have been increasing in the pandemic or syndemic here. I have to use, when we speak about communication, the term syndemia, in which contagion is increased by situations of inequality, and it is evident that a pandemic is not the same in all the countries across the world, and it is evident that the poorest countries are living a situation that is different comparing with then of the so-called first world. I am vaccinated. My colleague Andrea Terrani is vaccinated too. I don't know if many other colleagues in many countries of the so-called southern world have had the same opportunities. And this is important to consider, because this is another form of inequalities that we have to consider, because communication is not in a neutral world. So centrality of the platforms also has an acceleration for the inequalities. The case of filter bubbles, it is very important to consider when we speak about the new post-public sphere, the increasing dynamics that is very important for the new studies of political communication, and the role of algorithms in the mechanism of fragmentation. So the algorithms are as the responsible for this strange balance between fragmentation and unification that are the very essence elements of the so-called post-public sphere. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry for this rant toward the end.
Thank you, Michele. Very, very, very interesting speech in my point of view. And I think in this moment, give the floor to some comments, suggestion. Also, I have some suggestion, but only a little comments. But before, I want to ask to the other participants if we have, you write, yes, Lucian. In the chat, Michele, would you also describe this is a global victimization?
I don't know, because we have to define. We have before to define victimization. So I don't know if we can define it as the new post-public sphere and the process of transformation created by the digital platform as oh yes, oh, okay, I understand now. Yes, this is not my specific field of expertise, but yes, absolutely right. I fully agree with you. We should also consider the importance of criminality and criminal organization that operates in the construction of a new post-public sphere. And here I want to suggest some works, some theoretical and also empirical works by Donatella Della Porta on the role of criminal organization in the construction of a new post-public sphere. It's not my specific, unfortunately, but yes, I fully agree with you with the idea that we have also some criminal organization that are the background for the construction of a new digital ecosystem, and at the same time are responsible for the emergence of new politics. Think about, for example, the role of some trolling activities in the digital ecosystems that are managed by criminal organizations supporting some political actors or some international leaders. And it is, even if it's very difficult, as you know, to find the responsible. That is not so easy, even for the state apparatus and for the police and so on. So anyway, it's evident, but at the same time, we have no proofs that some criminal organization works, for example, for the power, even if it can be considered as evidence. Yes.
Lucian Carey asked you another, and another.
Surely. For this reason, Dal Yongjin used the expression platform imperialism that have been replacing the old concept of media imperialism established 1969 by Schiller, and the idea that USA economics activities can influence, can have a role across the world, is strongly declared by many scholars, many US scholars, as also Dal Yongjin is, because he lives in the United States. Yes.
Another question from Jose.
Jose Luis, this is a very, very important and very difficult question. Probably we can discuss on this point, not for 40 or 45 minutes, but for 40 hours. Yes, I think that there is, of course, a connection, a linkage between our moral feelings and the emergence of the sphere. I think that this is evident also from a psychosocial perspective on communication, and there are some very important studies on this point. Yes, I agree with you. There are some linkages, but at the same time, it's very difficult to find how and what, and in particular how to conceive these linkages. And aspect of psychological communication, but surely we have to consider these relationships.
Yes, people don't read, participants don't read the question. Okay.
Okay, sorry. First, Lucian Carey asked about the role of the US digital economy in the divide between North and South, and the idea that what happens in the legal and financial system of the USA affects the entire world. It is the question to whom I try to answer in a very banal way. And the second was Jose Luis, very, very kind for his thanks. So, my very welcome. And his question was, in your view, how the sphere and platformization of society is linked with current our moral feelings? How can we connect our private feelings with the new institutional trends? This was the double question that is very difficult to answer, but it is a crucial point that we have to consider as a media scholar and also as citizens.
Okay. There are any questions? I have only a comments on futures of past public sphere, commodification of citizens. That is only a comment. Someone in Italy, some scholars in Italy, have the idea not only citizens but also community as enterprises. It's a good way for the future. community as enterprises. It is impossible to think at this way, to think to our communities as an enterprises. Community is not an enterprises. It is impossible. But the idea of neoliberalism and what do you say in your interesting speech, Michele, it is the culture, the hegemonic culture in this moment. Also in people that they aren't neoliberalist, but they think in the same way. But it's only a little comment. Other?
Yes, I fully agree with you, Andrea, and this gives me the opportunity to read a very short excerpt from a book written by William Davis, The Limits of Neoliberalism, published by Sage in London. And he says, whether in the work of the Chicago School of Economics, the new public management and shareholder value in the 1980s, or the national competitiveness evaluation that framed policy debates in the 1990s, neoliberalism has sought to eliminate normative judgment from public life to the greatest possible extent. In the tradition of Jeremy Bentham, intrinsic values are to be replaced by extrinsic valuation, so the measurement, and it has provoked, in my opinion, the conversion from qualities into quantitative analysis. This is evident in many aspects of our life, also in the academic life, for example. And this is the evidence of a new world in which the normative public judgment has been replaced by measurement. And this is one of the basic point of neoliberalism, and at the same time, one of the element that make possible the idea of Pierre Dardot and Laval that neoliberalism is killing democracy.
Thank you, Michele. A virtual that is impossible to say. Mattia Sanna, another question. I think the last question in chat. Mattia Sanna Montanelli.
Referring to Zuboff and Kelton, do you think public awareness has any chance of influencing the platform society? No, but I think that people can connect themselves, rediscovering the idea of commonality. That means to replace the idea of vertical communication with the idea of horizontal communication, and at the same time to replace the enterprise communication with a more democratic communication. It means in other ways that we influence the platform society, but we can fight against the platform society. I fully agree with Colin Crouch when he says that it's impossible to replace or to change the post-democracy, but we can fight against it. We can try to replace the post-democracy with a new horizontal and more egalitarian democracy. At the same time, communication can be a very important element, very important to affirm democracy, but not in a tactical way, such as, for example, the digital optimistic thought in the end of the 90s, but in a new idea that put at the center the concept of common, and the idea of the communication as a new tool to create social solidarity. So another way to be explicit, I strongly support the idea of the rediscovery of the common, of the commune the idea of communality that has been clearly expressed by Pierre Tardot and Christian Laval, the two French scholars I've cited before.
Thank you very much, Michele. And say thanks for your speech. Thanks for your time. And
thank you all for your patience.
No patience. It's very, very interesting. And so we close this session, and we will move to 10 and 15 to the parallel session, and close this session, and say goodbye to all of you and to Michele. Grazie, Michele.
Bye-bye, thank you, bye.
Bye, ciao Michele.
Bye.
Bye.